Many people talk about the ups and downs of married life, but no one really prepares you for life after your spouse passes away. Welcome to Widowhood Real Talk with Dr. Tina, a safe place for widows, widowers, and their friends and family to talk about love and loss. Find comfort as you listen to honest conversations between Dr. Tina and invited guests who've experienced the loss of their forever partner, share their stories of love, grief, and healing. You are not alone in this journey. Join today's episode and discover a wealth of resources and learn how to connect with others who are traveling the same path. This is Widowhood Real Talk with Dr. Tina.
This conversation with Linda has some real tips, and you want each and every one of them. She just shared with me the most amazing tip on what to do during the holiday season. She has tips on what you can do as far as following up and the usefulness of your hospice team, hospital, and funeral home. Let's get into this conversation now. Hello, Linda. Welcome to the Widowhood.
Oh, hi. How are you today?
I am well. When you hear welcome to the Widowhood, what comes to mind for you?
Comes to mind is probably a community of, women who are widowed. And I think of that encompassing support and guidance and help for people who are going through that experience. A community for just widows. And it's wonderful to have that available for family, for people going through that. Because it's tough, no matter how you look at it.
It definitely is. And I would add that it's also a community for men because men are widowers. Right. And there are men and women in our community. So this conversation is for both of them to hear.
Okay.
And I want to say thank you for being part of this mini-series, Voices of Widowhood, Healing Through the Holidays, because grief during the holidays has a different kind of spin to it. Or what would you say to that?
Well, I think that grief during the holidays is a real tough time of year for people who are grieving. And, when the rest of the world is celebrating, right from all the decorations and the Walmarts and the stores and all of that and street lights, it's sharp, early on in grief. And for that time of year to come around and people are not in a place where they're feeling like they need to celebrate and they're feeling so sad and they just don't know. And then they see all of this around them. I guess it's kind of like a stark reminder of here I am, I've lost my loved one and the world is going on. And that just make me feel like here I am in my grief, but yet the world is just kind of flying by me. And it's just a bad time of year for people, and not even the first year of grief. I think that, our holidays will never be the same when we've lost our loved one, we've lost our spouse. I mean, it's never going to be the same. So, it's not even just that first holiday season. It could be the next. It could just be something that touches us every year because that loved one isn't there. That is empty.
Thank you for sharing that. This conversation is, you're speaking from a personal experience of your daughter's loss and also how you show up and support people. So I want to explain the reason why we chose widowhood. It did start with the passing of my husband, but my children their dad died. My husband's brother, that means their brother died. There was a nephew, there was a son. So that name was intentional to encompass everyone's loss. It may be the person that had the prime connection, but there are always other people on the outskirts of that, that their grief is just as relevant.
Yes.
And if you would share some of how you came to be doing, how you serve people now and your motivation for that.
Okay. Well, my obviously I do have my own personal story of loss. Many years ago, in 1988, I lost my mom just before Christmas that year. She died and we buried her on Christmas Eve day. And then within 10 months, I had my first daughter and she died. And so with those two losses, I just felt that, all loss is just as painful. Losing my mom was just as painful. Losing my daughter was painful. But I just found there wasn't any help and support for that. I got from everybody around me, I need to move on, all those sayings that people say that really just don't help. And so I found myself, I did go to a support group and I found that to be helpful. And then I eventually got interested. They had asked me if I wanted to continue the group because the lady who was running it she had been doing it for years. She was literally burnt out. And so I took it over. Probably in hindsight, it was too soon after my own personal loss, but it's what it is. And so I kind of made it my mission to create what I called at that point a resource and referral service for anybody who's had a loss. And I tried to accumulate all the resources that I could find. Back then we didn't have the internet like we have it now. Even with that, that's a whole nother topic. Even with the internet, it's not easy for people grieving to find the resources that they need because they just don't have the bandwidth to do that. So that's a whole nother conversation. But I kind of made it my mission to just bring together whatever I could find. And during that process, I had asked our local hospice if they would sponsor the support group that I was going to facilitate. Because it really was, it wasn't just showing up once a month. There was a lot involved with that. And so in order for them to allow me to, host the group through their hospice, I had to go through their training. So I went through all the bereavement care training. I went through the patient care training. I had to do all of that. And back then it was, weeks of training, which is fine. And so I started from there, running groups for them, doing a lot of outreach into our community. And I started to meet funeral directors. And I started to ask them, what do you do for your families after you've served them for those few days? And all of them said nothing but I should. And so I took that I should, and I started talking to funeral homes and developing my grief care programs that to this day, I still work for most of the same funeral homes that I had so many years ago, which is almost 35 years now. And so I just went down a lot of different paths working with hospice, funeral homes, faith-based organizations. So that's kind of my background is I've actually trained people and certified people in grief care education. I'm just doing a lot of work in this space. And I've just learned so much. I have my own personal loss, but I believe for me, I learned so much from the families that I've worked with. Obviously I work with a lot of widows and widowers, parents that lost children, any kind of loss you can think of. And I just have really learned from everybody else, if that makes any sense. Them sharing their experience with me helps me to share that with other people. Obviously no names or anything disclosed, but it just gives me a window into all of the personal loss. And what I did is I constantly was, I always documented my phone calls with families. And then from there, I actually wrote a series of books that I send out to my families throughout the year. And I say that those books were written from the stories that were shared with me. With obviously my own personal loss of what bolted me into this room, into this world, but it's all of the families to this day that I talk to that really have given me, I guess, the wisdom to know how people need to be supported, the wisdom to know how I can meet them where they're at. Because I think in the work that we both are doing, we're meeting our families and our people where they're at, and that's what they need. And so that's my life. I say that my daughter's legacy is my life's work. And so that I made, what do they say? Turning pain into purpose. I'm a perfect example who took pain from loss and turned it into purpose. And so here I am, and now connecting with people like yourself and being able to share and talk about loss. And it's just, I say there's a huge gap in grief care in our culture. So those of us who are doing this kind of work, it is so valuable and so helpful for families, because let's face it, there's nothing for them. Most times they're just left. One thing that I think is really profound, and I believe it's profound, that I say that I have the same exact conversations today that I had with families 35 years. So what that tells me is that all of, grief transcends through generations. It transcends, through male, female, different relationships of people who we lose. And so even with all of the resources out there now, there's still the same conversations. Nobody cares. Nobody's calling on me. Everybody was there when my loved one died, but now here I am 6, 7 months, 18 months down the road, and nobody's even thinking about me. And it's the same that it was 35 years. And so that's sad to me, that people aren't finding the resources. So doing what you're doing and providing a resource for families and someplace to tap into, to learn, and to be able to share, I think that's what's most important is the work that we're doing. Because there's no entity that is taking this on and doing this for our culture. They're just not. And it's a problem around the world. The grief care, there's no infrastructure for grief care any place, if you think about that. There's no continuation of care from anywhere. And obviously I do work for funeral homes that provide that continuation of care, but it's a very small percentage of the number of funeral homes that are in our country and in our different states. So yeah, that's my mission in life, just to keep. To me, it's not work. It's, my like I said, my calling, my life mission is to just meet people where they're at and support them. I had to learn early on that I can't take somebody else's grief away from them, you know, and people ask me, how do you do this work? And I learned early on that there was nothing that I was going to say or do that was going to take it away, but I knew I could be there, and I knew I could listen, and I knew I could provide resource. And so there you have it.
Thank you for all of that. Yeah. You mentioned the word hospice, and I don't want to make an assumption that someone knows what that word represents. Mm-hmm. Would you mind explaining hospice and the services under that and why someone would go under hospice? And if you can move a little closer, your volume is in and out.
Okay, I'm gonna move myself closer because I was knocked over my desk. But anyways, is this better?
Yes. I didn't know if you had headsets or anything, but I mean, this is better.
Okay. So hospice is an organization that supports the dying patient. They have to have a terminal diagnosis. Typically, they say it's, if somebody's going to die within 6 months, they can get on hospice. And it just really is a wonderful organization that supports not only the dying patient, but I think more so they support the family during that process. They provide, equipment at home. They have, both care teams of, nurses and volunteers coming in to help the family, give them some respite from having, because it's very difficult to take care of a loved one when they're, going through their end of life. And so typically somebody would get on hospice and then their life would end during that time. What most people aren't aware of is that most hospices, if not all of them, are required to provide grief after the patient dies to the beneficiaries. And so it's just mandated through, I don't know if it's Medicaid or Medicare, that they provide bereavement support. And all of the programs that I've ever been aware of or ever been involved in, you don't have to have used hospice services to access the bereavement. So I always recommend, again, giving resources to families. I always recommend, call your local hospice, check their websites. A lot of times I'll do that for them. And, there's support groups available for them, any of the activities that they do, and they do a lot. I mean, they do a lot of things that help families to stay connected to their loved ones. They do a lot of remembrance ceremonies, they do their butterfly releases, their lanterns. I mean, there's just a lot of things that they do that are not only available to the families that they've served, they're available to their communities, which I think is really important. Because again, another thing to this day, I tell people, look, did you go through a hospice? And if they say no, I'll ask them what county they're in, and we'll look up information. And typically people are like, oh, I didn't know that I can, access this because we didn't use hospice. So that's a good thing to talk about, is that hospice is there for the bereavement community. Most communities just don't know about it, but it is a good resource, both for support groups, individual counseling, and for community events that help families to memorialize their loved ones and have these opportunities to remember their loved ones and honor them.
Thank you for explaining that. You made a statement about staying connected to your loved one. And someone may be listening and go, but they died. Why would I want to stay connected? I thought I'm supposed to just move on. Can you explain further the importance of those rituals, keeping those memories, and how that helps with someone's grief, especially during the holidays, that they're going to be experiencing that? And it seems that gap is even more apparent.
Well, it is. And that is another thing, again, unique about that time of year for families, because that loved one is not there. So the question becomes, what can I do to help me to feel connected to my loved one when the rest of the world is indicating that I should be over this, right? I think ultimately that's what we do when we're grieving. We get to a point where we find ways that we can help to feel like they're part of our day, whether it's just simple, like, I don't know why I think my daughter's favorite color was red, because obviously she was a baby and she wouldn't know otherwise. But, there've been times when I either felt sad or during the holidays, I'll wear red. And I know in my head that I wasn't wearing red because it was the holiday time. I was wearing it to honor her. So there's simple things that we can do, because it does help us, because your mind has to catch up, or your heart has to catch up to your mind. It's almost like your mind knows that your loved one has died. You know that intellectually. But your heart is so broken, and it takes a while for that to come together, your heart and your mind. I say that we never get over our grief. And I don't say that in meaning that, people are going to not be able to function in life. That's not what happens. What happens is they become more familiar with the grief, And then they find these ways to honor their loved one. And so, part of my work always is telling families, what can we do to help you to feel like that day that's coming, whether it's a birthday, an anniversary, or a holiday, what can you do that's going to help you to feel connected? Your loved one's clothing, a t-shirt, a sweatshirt, whatever it is, cooking their favorite meal, wearing their favorite color, loved ones who are sad, their birthday's coming up and it's like, oh, their birthday's coming up. And, a lot of times the anticipation of those special days or the holiday can be worse than the actual holiday itself. And people will say that. So I always tell people, try and plan something so that that you're doing something in honor of your loved one. Even if it's just burn a candle. And I always tell people, I have to add a disclosure, do not leave the room when there's a candle burning. But there's things that we can do that from the outside world, nobody can even notice it or recognize it, but we feel it inside that we're feeling connected to them. And that is so very important. And, again, hospice with the programs that they provide, a lot of funeral homes will do programs and outreach into their communities that help people, again, to feel that connection. And it's so important. And we can do that privately in very simple ways. We can do it in a grander way, whatever that means to us. Sometimes, like, I'll never forget, I went to a lunch one time at this local restaurant. And when our check came, the waitress said, nobody's paying this morning because, and I don't know what the name was, but Mr. Jones passed away and his family's here. And everybody who's come in today, they want to give him a free meal. I was like, oh my gosh, that's just, and here I'm like, I'm praying for the guy. I wrote a note on a napkin, dear family, thank you so much. It's so wonderful. And I mean, that was a grander thing, right? That the family came together to watch, patrons come into this restaurant and be able to, the waitress to say, you're not going to be paying for this lunch. That's what they're doing in his memory, in his honor. So I just think that's so cool. So yeah, we don't have to do things in a grand way, but just the little things, a piece of jewelry, something that, reminds you of your loved one, or their jewelry, or something that was special to them. And always telling families, talk about your loved one, share those stories, share those mementos, share those things, because again, that keeps them alive and keeps us feeling connected to them in a different way than what we've been used to. Right? We're used to them, being there right before us, and our lives are so intertwined. And, and that's what I say too. It's not just that we lost our loved one being before us, it's all the ways that they were a part of our life. That's a lot. And you mentioned something too, it is said, I don't know who has said this, but I have read different studies. They say for each person who dies, there's at least 5 people who are going to deeply grieve that loss. Now, again, that depends on, the number of siblings, the number of, children in the family, and that, how big the family is. But there's at least 5 people that are grieving that loss. And that I think is low, but it does give you an idea. You know what I'm saying? It's right. You got the closest people to that loved one. And I know I have my dog, and I don't know if I should get up and let him out, but
it's okay. When you mentioned about turning your pain into purpose, and you also mentioned about training that you do, if someone is listening to this conversation and go, I think I'm at a place that I want to turn purpose out of my pain, how can they connect with you? And what would that training look like? What are the options for that, and how is it conducted?
Okay, so I have a couple of trainings that I've done in the past that I work with this other lady. She's in this grief care world, and she's been in this world for many years. And we've done like actually it was like a 20-hour training that we started out. We went down to 10 hours because people don't have all that time. So I just have different programs that I have provided to people who want to provide grief care. And it's not like some of these bigger organizations that charge like thousands of dollars and all this kind of stuff. We're kind of just, we're going to teach you what you need to know so you can be a good support person for the person who has experienced the grief. And oftentimes, as you know, it is somebody who's had grief of their own. So the training also helps to support them in their own grief. We like to make sure that they're a little bit further away. I'd like to say at least 2 years from their own personal loss before they embark upon wanting to work with other families. And there's a lot of other good programs out there. So the best, I usually post on my website. I don't have anything in the near future that's been booked because I have to coordinate with my colleague. But, I've got so much information. If somebody wants to, look at a training, they can access ours when we do schedule them. I can, like right now, I'm talking to a funeral director and just talking to her and giving her resources and helping her to know what would be helpful to give to her families and stuff. So that's another thing. I mean, it's just to talk to me. I love doing that, sharing information and resources. I mean, I just think that's so important. But we do have the formal, grief care training. We do have that and done it for many years. And it does help people to be more organized, have the resources and the structure. They don't have to create anything, like everything is created for them already. We just teach them how to use the tools. Yeah.
Thank you. I know you said the funeral director speaks with you. What type of services do you offer through funeral homes, or what type of services should people ask their funeral home that they kind of overlook?
Okay, so the first question, what I do is I work with funeral homes and I provide a follow-up of care throughout at least that first year after the loss. And what that typically includes is I wrote the 5 books that are sent to the families throughout the year. Each book was written to be received at a specific time based on things that are commonly going on for people. So we mail them out at 1, 3, 6, and 11 months. And then during the holiday time, we have a holiday book. I also call families. I have some funeral homes want me to call them, throughout the year. I have some that want me to call, a month after the loss, whatever the funeral home wants me to do. And then included in all of that is just, again, any additional resources that they need or want for their families. They're just provided to the funeral home, to put in their funeral homes, to put in their family packets, to use if they are hosting a support group. And as far as the second question, just repeat that question again, because I don't know if you're asking if families are asking about grief care, or ask that again, just so I can understand.
Someone goes to the funeral home, they know that there's services to help the homegoing, the burial of their loved one. But what are some things that you found people don't tap into the resources of their funeral home? Just as you explained things that people don't tap into with hospice that was available. I know for me, trigger warning for anyone that's listening, my husband was cremated, and he told me that he wanted some of his ashes to go to his brothers and to go to the hunting ground. I found out later I could have taken the urn back to the funeral home and they could have separated the ashes. I did not know that. I did that through tears and trying to fulfill my husband's desire. I would not recommend that to anyone. I didn't know that I could take the urn back, give them the containers, and they would have split that up and did that. Yeah. So I like to make sure that people know whatever different things that you kind of find people didn't know about that they could utilize, because that could have saved me some pain.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it's funny you ask that question, because the average person has no idea that the funeral home is capable of, giving you that extension of service if that's what you need. Now, ideally, again, in an ideal world, the funeral homes that I work for, we provide what I call proactive grief care. So we're actually providing the grief care. The family doesn't have to ask for it. It's part of the services. They're never charged for it. I've never had a funeral home that went back and charged their families for my services. They get the services I provide them. They take great care of me, and families just automatically get it. They're told they're going to get it. Anybody else has no idea to do what you just said, go back to the funeral home specifically, with the ashes, to do that. People just don't know. And I mean, that's the truth of it. They have no idea, and this is what my soapbox with funeral directors all these years always is: you need to proactively provide grief care for families, because they're not going to think of you. You're not even going to be on the list of being thought of for grief care. And they'll say, well, I have a lending library, I have resources. Your families don't know that you have that. So no matter all these years, I'm still on that same soapbox. We have to be proactive. But I would tell anybody who's listening, don't hesitate to call your funeral director and ask, what are you doing in grief care? Now, in saying that, I know that probably most, if not all, funeral home sites, websites have a section that says either resources or grief support. Always check into that. It's usually just some listing of some local groups, maybe some content as far as, specific to loss of a spouse or loss of a child. So I would first always check their website to see what they have. And do not hesitate to call the funeral home and ask for what you need if it has anything to do with grief and grief care. Because they if they don't have anything, they can direct you, they can put you in the right direction at least. If they're not doing anything themselves, they'll be able to refer you to something else. So that's really important for people to be proactive yourself if you have to be, because there is so much out there now for grieving families, they're just not finding it. You know, they don't have the bandwidth to search. They don't even know that they can search. You know what I'm saying? It's almost like you just said about hospice. People don't know that hospice provides grief care to communities. I mean, it's just, I don't know what's ever going to change that, but we have to speak for ourselves. We have to ask if we really feel that we need help, we need support, we need resources, we need to talk to somebody, we have to reach out. And again, tap into your funeral home, tap into your local hospice, because that's where you're going to find those resources.
Thank you. You mentioned about not having the bandwidth. And I think sometimes people think grief is the person died, I miss them, and I go back to work. Mm-hmm. What are some things that people don't know about their own body and their own experience of grief that they may be dealing with and not realize it's grief-centric?
They don't realize it. You know, again, I tell people when they lose a loved one, for the most part, your brain is hijacked. Your brain is literally hijacked. You get it. You lose your loved one. You're dealing with that. You're dealing with all the things that you need to do to take care of your loved one. Again, that's your interaction with the funeral homes. And then after that, you're just, again, your brain is still hijacked. You could have been the most organized person. You could have been, you know, whatever it is. Once you experience that loss, there's like the day before the loss and there's the days after the loss, you know? And so now what are you going to do those days after the loss? There's so much that families have to churn through. Grief can affect us emotionally, physically, spiritually, cognitively. It affects all of who we are. I say it affects our senses. People don't even hear right when they're grieving. Things taste different to them. You know, they may have liked a certain dish and now all of a sudden they don't like it. You know, music taps into the grief in the. There's so many ways that grief affects us that it affects us physically. You know, if like I always had I'd say a pissy stomach, whatever. Well, if you're grieving, your stomach's probably going to be a little bit worse. You know, if you suffer from headaches, you might have more headaches. And as caregivers, I always tell people that it is recommended that within the first 6 months after your loved one dies, you should have a physical with your primary care physician. You should go do that just to make sure that everything is okay with you physically, because there are some real things that happen. And then as more time churns on, the more that people stuff in grief and they start feeling all these different responses to it, they don't understand it because they're gotten away from the action.
Right.
You know, like 18 months down the road, somebody can be like, I'm just so fatigued. I'm so tired. I can't get myself organized. I feel like I'm just stuck. They're not relating it to the death because society's telling us 3 days you're done, you know, and you got to go back to work and you got to go back to life. And that does not happen for most people. They do go back to work, but their whole being of who they were before the death, they are not that same person. So now they're dealing with their life trying to, you spend that whole first year trying to churn through all of the ways that your loved one's gone. And then it seems like during that second year, you change somehow. You don't even know what day it happens. It just happens that all of a sudden you're reestablishing your life. You know, you start reestablishing who you are, what your routines are, things that you're going to surround yourself with. And hopefully that's what people do. There's some people that get stuck in their grief and they stay there for the rest of their lives. And that's a really sad story. But I think that as people churn on, typically we move on. We don't ever forget our grief is right here. You know, I can ask any person who's experienced a major loss in their life, they can say this to me. I can sit here today right now and I can put myself right back that day that I found out that he or she died. You know, it's there. Those emotions are there and they can be brought up. They're just not as strong. They're not as frequent. It's not as scary. I think that people are scared of what they're experiencing because they don't realize it. So I always recommend read whatever you can about grief. You know, read whatever you can about taking care of yourself while you're grieving, because that's another thing that I'm a big advocate for. I think that we have to make sure that people give themselves permission to take care of themselves, particularly when they're grieving. Because if they're not taking care of themselves, they're not taking care of anybody else. So I try and help people identify what are some things that you can do to help take care of yourself. You know, we have care plans they can fill out, you know, reminders, even write down to drink your water. People can't even think of that while they're grieving. You know, get enough nutrition. What does that mean to somebody who's grieving? They're like, I don't care about food. But we have these, you know, tools that we can give them that, you know, keep track of how much water you're drinking. What are you actually eating? Did you have something nutritious? Did you walk a little bit today? Did you get your feet out into the grass today? You know, things like that. We need to do things that are going to soothe our senses and soothe us. And that starts with taking care of you. I have to take care of me before anything else. And yeah.
When you look at the holidays and grief specific, what are some recommendations that you can give to the people that are listening?
Okay, so the first, I think, most important recommendation that I can give is people need to communicate with those around them. It sounds very simple, but it's not, because each person in the family has an idea of what they think they need or want in regard to the holidays, whether it's, we're going to cook at mom's house, or we're going to do something different, are we going to stick with tradition, are we not? I think it's really important that families actually sit down and communicate with each other with words. I'm not talking a text message or an email. I'm talking with words. And again, we have tools. I have a whole sheet that I can give to families that they can, fill out. What are my expectations for that day? What are some old traditions I'd like to honor? What are some new traditions that I'd like to implement? Who do I want to be around? And always saying that if you change anything, you're allowed to do that. You can decide as a family you're going to do X, Y, Z, but if for some reason you don't owe anybody an explanation if you decide you can't do that at the time, because you want to leave yourself an out.
So and that Thanksgiving may be different than the next other Thanksgiving. Mm-hmm. This is just this year. And then you get, okay, thank you. And again, it would be just the upcoming, because again, we can't go too far with, sometimes when you're grieving, you don't know what you're going to be doing tomorrow or how you're going to be handling that. Yes.
Right? So we've got this first holiday season coming for people who are newly bereaved within the last year, since the last holiday season. It's just the most helpful thing is to communicate with your family. Do not be afraid, because what happens is that when words aren't spoken and communication is not happening, we have expectation. And then we start feeling the pressure of what I should be doing or what I could be doing or all those things. And each of those people are dealing with the same thing. So that communication is really, really important. And I tell people, you can come up with a new tradition. One of the biggest things, I got a lot of feedback from this. I said, have a tablecloth where you all write down your loved one's name and a memory of them. And then every year you take that out. How many families have come back? I can't even tell you how many families have come back from that simple suggestion and tell me about their precious tablecloth. And then the next year they pull it out and they do some more memories on there. It just becomes a family treasure. And it's so simple, that you wouldn't think that would be so healing and so helpful. But again, doing and feeling connected, that's what it's about. So doing things during that holiday that help you to feel connected. You might not feel like cooking anything, but let's just say that, your husband loved your stuffing. Make your stuffing. You don't have to give it to anybody to eat it. You can eat it yourself. You know what I'm saying? So these are things that people can't think of themselves because they just can't. They're so tied up in the grief and life and everything else going on. So the communication, do something that's going to help you feel connected to your loved one, whether it's an old tradition or a new one that you can come up with. I have a lot of people that leave that place setting there for the loved one at the table with a picture. And there are families that some family members are like, oh, I can't believe they're doing this. But it's like, okay, it's fine. If it's your home and this is what you decide you're going to do, you go ahead and you do that. You put that picture there of your loved one. It's okay. I have families that'll, again, burn a candle and just have the candle going all day so that they know, even if they see it out of the corner of their eye, they know that they have that candle lit for their loved one. You can always watch those candles because I sometimes worry about that suggestion. So use an LCD, what is that called? The ones with the little batteries, I have them. I've used them. Whatever it is that you feel that you need to do. And sometimes people don't have to do anything. They can just decide to stay home. Maybe some people really want to be alone. And that's okay too, as long as we make sure they have what they need and we offer them your presence or your time. There's some people who are like, no, I really just need to be home. And then another consideration, which I think is really important as well. Sometimes people think if I go away for the holidays, I'm going to be better. I'm going to be able to deal with this if I go away. So I think what most people find out is that no matter where you go, you're packing your grief with you and it's going with you. And what ends up happening is that you're not doing the thing that you usually would be doing. So it's new to you. So that's another challenge. You're not familiar with it. That's not a comfort. You know what I'm saying? You're doing something new that you're not used to. So that sometimes causes people some challenges that they thought, well, I'm going to get away. I'm going to go to a sunny place. I'm going to sit on a beach. Well, that grief's going to come sit on the beach with you.
It
just is. You're taking it with you, and it just is what it is. And so I think planning is important, to plan something, and then leave yourself the out that if you decide to change your mind, you can do that even if it's last minute.
I like
don't be concerned with, I offered to make a salad and you're not going to show up because you're not going to just drop off a salad. Be okay with that because nobody else is going to worry about that. We can't put pressures on ourselves. We have to be kind and gentle with ourselves. I think that's an important piece of all of this as well, is don't put too many expectations on yourself. Because you already have enough to deal with all of the ways that this grief is affecting you for so much longer than anybody would ever imagine. That's another thing, right? That's another thing that can be talked about in length, that grief lasts so much longer than the average person would even consider. Look at our employers. They're still giving 3 days off for bereavement leave. It's like, when are we going to get, 2 months off for that? I mean, there's people that really need to stay home. They can't function. They can't think straight. They can't be as productive as they might have been. And I have found through the years that employers have been a lot better with families, by allowing them the flexibility of, staying home a little bit longer, maybe transitioning to working from home. I've actually written letters for people's employers telling them that, this is what is usually needed if somebody's having a really difficult time with their loss. And I make the suggestion they can work from home for a little longer. That might be better for them. And I've never gotten called back and said my employer denied me that, because again, there's another communication that we have to have is with our employers, because if you're in that stage of life where you have to work and all those things for a living, you have to communicate with your employer what is going on.
That is an excellent suggestion, to reach out to your mental health professional, your general practitioner, to ask for that note if you're needing that. I appreciate you taking the time to have this conversation. You have provided some helpful tips I know people never heard of before. And I have asked you a lot of questions, and I want to know if you have any questions of me.
So as far as how long ago did you lose your husband?
It was March 11th, 2017.
Okay. And again, that's not a lot of time. So that's not a lot of time that's gone by, but what did you find was the most difficult thing for you? And I know there might be a lot, but what stands out for you in this time now, looking back?
The reality that I would never talk to him again. Mm-hmm. The reality that he is off the planet. Mm-hmm. As our children have milestones, our daughter recently got married, that he was not there. Mm-hmm. The reality that there is not one more phone call, one more conversation, that he is gone.
And the permanency of that.
That's right. I was, and I still am very fortunate. My family and friends have been my rock. My faith has been valuable. Mm-hmm. I know a lot of people no longer have their same community. I do. And they have been so supportive. And I'm grateful for them in that. Yeah. And the other thing, that the finality of him being gone, and then talking to other people, hearing how unsupported they are. To talk to people and hear that the most bizarre things that people would think to open their mouth and say. And it's like, you obviously have never experienced something harsh for you to open your mouth and say that. So that has been amazing in supporting people and hearing the things that they've been told. Those have been the two for me.
Yeah. And, the whole thing with, most people, I have to say, most people do not have what I would think would be adequate support. Now, that's an individual interpretation. Somebody can have so many people around them, and you look at the family like, oh, they got so many people around them, and that individual could be standing there feeling so alone. Yes. It's like we can't assume because somebody has family and a lot of friends, because it happens for a lot of people that the person they expected to be supportive of them oftentimes is not, right? And so those friendships change if not done with. And then there always seems to be that one person that steps up, right? And I tell people, if you have at least one person, you are blessed. Because again, you do rely on faith, because I also say, that you're never alone. God is with you all the time. But when you're grieving, again, these are things that you're not really focusing on. Your brain has been hijacked. Just think of it. I tell my funeral directors, just think of this: when your families come into your funeral home and sit down at that conference table, think of their brains being hijacked out of their head, like literally. And the information you're giving them, they're probably like just looking at you, just like, yeah, okay. Like they don't know what's going on. So, and we can assume that, okay, so they have family, they have whoever's around. I never make that assumption. I tell people you have to find that one person. And sometimes it could be a stranger from a support group. It can be somebody that they resonate with, like yourself doing a podcast. They'll turn to you, and want to listen to you and what you have to say. And so, it is hard. And I'm so happy to hear that you do feel that you were supported, because I think that is one of the most important things, because the work of grief is done by you and only you. But if you have those people around you that can hold you up in the times that you couldn't hold yourself up, or there's people that are giving you the time and the space to just say and be who you are and what you need to say and what you need to be, and that's really important, that you get that attention from the people around you. And again, even if it's one person. So I'm happy for you that you feel that you have that, because that is not the majority of the people that I talk to down the road are telling me I'm the only person who's checking in with them. Even their closest family and friends are not checking in with them 10, 11, 12 months, 18 months down the road. They're just not because, I say this thing I think is really important to add here too, is that I tell people that those around you aren't bringing it up or aren't saying something because they don't care. They don't know. They don't understand. So there's no understanding. And guess what's the second reason? The second reason is because it's easier not to say anything.
And we're saying I'm fine. We're saying I'm fine all the time. I'm fine. I'm fine. So if you're fine, if you said you're fine, then I'm going to believe that, and we don't have to deal with this. We're just going to act
normal, like nothing has changed.
Exactly.
Yep. And that's the thing. I tell people, just say I'm taking it day by day, because they can't even figure out what to say. So just telling somebody newly bereaved, it's okay to say to people, I have my bad days.
Right.
Because if you keep saying you're okay, just like you just said, if you keep saying you're okay and they're looking at you, you look exactly the same as you did before your husband died. And they're going to say, nothing's changed. She's going to work. She looks good. She's taking care of herself. She says she's fine. That's it. That's the end of that. So yeah, that goes around. I can't think of any other questions. I think it's amazing. Again, you are another example of turning your pain into purpose, by doing this podcast and doing the work that you do. And, that's the most that you can do. That's the most that any of us can do, is to be a little bit more sensitive to others when they're grieving, because we know, and we don't want anybody to join our club, right? It's like nobody wants to join our club. It's hysterical. I think I told you we do the grief cruise, and we'll be in the restaurant at night eating and dancing and laughing, and people will come up to us and say, we want to be part of your group. We're like, no, you don't. It's like we don't even want to tell them what our group is, because we don't want to make them feel bad, and we all get a chuckle out of that. But yeah, it's there's a lot to be said about surrounding yourself with people who do understand, because they have had a similar loss, and finding that one person who can really be supportive of you. That is really important. And that person has to feel like they're being supported. That's most important.
Exactly.
Right? Anybody can say, oh, I'm supporting my sister, and if I don't feel my sister supporting me, I'm not being supported. So,
at all. That's a perversion.
Yeah.
Well, I am going to say something to our listeners, and then I want you to have the final say, maybe another thought. Share your website, email address. It will be in the show notes, but anything else that you would like to say to wrap up this conversation. Okay. I am grateful that you found value in your time to spend with us today. Linda's concept of the tablecloth, I think you should check that out. That is amazing. And also reach out to your funeral home, hospice, whoever helped you, the hospital. If you are looking for resources in your area, she has given you that tidbit to check in with them, to ask for the resources that they have. When you were there and your loved one was passing, your mind was focused on that. Now your mind is focusing on what tools you need to continue living and keeping their memory alive. So thank you. I am sorry for your loved one that is no longer here, that drove you to this conversation, but I'm glad that you found.
Oh, that's so beautifully said. I don't know how I can say anything more beautiful than that. It feels alone, but there's a lot that can fill some of that time to help you with your grief. There really is. There's resources out there. I have my website. It's under morningdiscoveries.com, and that's MOURNING discoveries.com. I am happy to talk to anybody. I do have a monthly support group that I run every second Wednesday of the month. at 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. If anybody's interested in that, you can let me know. I can send you a link and you just register for it and you can join us every month in that. And I don't use anybody's addresses or information for any other reason but to contact you. So there are resources. I encourage you to continue to try and tap into those. And I wish you well. I wish you well on your journey, because grief is a journey. And just remember this, that it's not so much the time that goes by, it's what you do with that time that really matters. So think of the things that you can do with your time that can help you, because that will just help all those around you as well. The best that I can say.
Thank you.
Thank you for spending another episode with Widowhood Real Talk. If you found the contents of today helpful, share the episode to anyone you know who may need it. Subscribe to the show and tune in to Widowhood Real Talk each week. Then visit widowhood-realtalkwithtina.org to join the community and access additional resources. Remember, you are not alone in this journey.